The National Development Plan, drafted by the National Planning Commission in consultation with citizens, business, labor, and the various political parties, then finalized and published in 2012. This National Development Plan laid out the vision of the South Africa which we aim to realize by 2030. Good people, 2030 is fast approaching. We're basically in the final quarter of this 20-year plan. How does the scoreboard look at the moment? What performance statistics and points do we aim to achieve? And are we on track to achieving these? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the state? And how do these qualities of the state affect the likelihood that we will win as a nation? And what role can we all as citizens play to help tilt the scoreboard in our favor going forward? Over the next 7 to 10 episodes, we'll dissect the National Development Plan chapter by chapter, understanding the targets that it has set out, reporting on the progress toward these targets, and diagnosing the strengths and weaknesses in the state and our nation's implementation of this plan, to hopefully, over time, aid in informing a more conscious and competent citizenry that is well positioned to put numbers on the scoreboard and help our republic to win. Today, we delve into the first 2 of 15 chapters of this National Development Plan. These first 2 chapters are introductory and context setting in their nature. With that said, let's get into it. The National Development Plan is the nation's long-term plan to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. It is the North Star for our state. It is the reference document that all organs of state are meant to look to as the primary guide for where they should be steering our nation. 489 pages long with about 15 chapters, it is detailed in its definition of the challenges the country faces and where it needs to go. What was the process for developing this National Development Plan? Well, the NDP was developed over about 2 years through consultation with citizens, labor, business, the civil service, and political parties. The development of the NDP was led by the National Planning Commission, which was appointed by President Jacob Zuma in May of 2010. The chairperson of the commission, this National Planning Commission, was Trevor Manuel, and interestingly, the deputy chairperson was the person on the steering wheel at this present moment, President Cyril Ramaphosa. About a year after its appointment in June 2011, the National Planning Commission shared a diagnostic report which detailed South Africa's achievements and shortcomings since democracy in 1994. This diagnostic report provided the context for the development of a responsive draft national plan, which was then released in November 2011. After wide consultation on the draft plan with state, organs, business, religious leaders, NPOs, unions, and citizens, the National Development Plan was finally published in August of 2012. The National Development Plan consists of 15 chapters with a few introductory sections before these 15 chapters. The first 2 chapters of the National Development Plan and the introductory sections before them provide the foundation and context for this National Development Plan, articulating the vision of the plan, summarizing its contents, and laying out the key trends globally and locally that the nation was subject to during the development of this plan. After these introductory and context-setting chapters, chapters 3 to 15 lay out the specific targets that the nation aims to achieve by 2030. How these can be achieved, and the context surrounding each of these different targets that the nation is aiming toward achieving by 2030. By my assessment, chapters 3 to 15 can be categorized into 5 subgroups. The first dealing with economic infrastructure, the second dealing with our diplomacy and global positioning as a country, the third dealing with social infrastructure for the people, the fourth focusing on the state's capacity and ability to deliver, and the fifth detailing the plan for building a unified South Africa. Now, among the first of these introductory sections of the National Development Plan, before we get to chapter 1, is the vision statement. Personally speaking, this may be my favorite section of the National Development Plan. The vision statement, over 12 pages, describes the characteristics of the Republic of South Africa and its people. The vision statement reads like a beautifully written poem, emotive and inspiring, written in first person with the frequent use of the word we. The vision statement speaks from the future in 2030, looking back on how far we as a nation have come since the pre-1994 discriminatory and undemocratic South Africa to a free, fair, and multicultural and prosperous nation in 2030. To give you a sense of some of what the vision statement affirms about the nature of our nation and its people, I've included a few quotes from the vision statement on the slide. And I think it would be nice to read over some of these quotes just so we can be on the same page about the tone and the articulation of our nation and our people that's provided in this vision statement. Some of these quotes include, "We are Africans. We are resilient. We make things. We love reading. All our citizens read, write, converse, and value ideas and thought. We work towards goals with patience invested in actual effort. We invest in our efforts and are not waiting in disengaged expectation. As artists, we express and celebrate. We expose and nurture. We explore, shift, and change frontiers. We are a community of multiple, overlapping identities, cosmopolitan in our nationhood. We are energized by sharing our resourcefulness. We experience fulfillment in life, living it in the successful society we are creating. We refrain from being cruel, demeaning, or hurtful in disagreement. We solve our differences through discussion. We respect ability, competence, and talent. We make things. We sweep and keep clean our yard. We travel through it. We enjoy the varied climate, landscape, and vegetation. It is as diverse as we are. This vision statement, I think, when you have time, just maybe set aside 20 to 30 minutes to read through it, because it provides a very nice articulation of this ideal South Africa that we are all working towards, and it's nothing short of inspiring when one reads through it. And it really hit me on a deep level, in a sense, in terms of inspiration. But as beautifully written as it is, and as beautiful a picture as it paints about this nation and where we are headed, it is somewhat sad when once you read this and you get past the information, the feeling of inspiration after reading this. It's kind of sad how far we are from realizing this vision statement, which was articulated as someone speaking from 2030 back in 2012. And we're approaching 2030, and we're far from this vision that we envisioned for ourselves by 2030. So that is a bit disheartening. But beyond that, the vision statement itself provides, I think, a sound foundation for the type of South Africa that we want to create and how we want it to feel. It really evokes those types of emotions. After the vision statement, we have another introductory section, the overview section. This section basically provides an executive summary of the National Development Plan over 40 pages. Without summarizing the plan, I'll touch on some of the key information that this section outlines to give us a view of the primary challenges the NDP aims to address and the associated targets and priorities of the National Development Plan. Remember that before the development of the National Development Plan, the National Planning Commission worked on a diagnostic report which detailed South Africa's achievements and shortcomings from 1994 to 2012. This diagnostic report outlined 9 challenges which South Africa was facing at the time. These included the fact that too few people worked, the quality of education for Black people was poor, spatial divides impeded inclusive development, the public health system could not meet demands or sustain quality, public services were often of poor quality, corruption was high, and the society remained divided. A failure to implement policies between 1994 and 2012 was also highlighted as a major reason for the slow progress that the nation had made between that period. 13 years ago today, and these challenges that were laid out, I'm almost certain are still existing and persist today and might actually be worse than they were in 2012. The scoreboard is not looking good for our nation, man. The scoreboard is not looking good. Considering these challenges and the vision that the nation aimed to achieve by 2030, two overarching goals were set in the National Development Plan. The first of these two goals is to eliminate income poverty by reducing the proportion of households with a monthly income below 419 Rand per person in 2009 prices from 39% to 0% by 2030. This 419 Rand per person was equivalent to the lower bound poverty line in 2009. As of 2023, 37.9% of people in South Africa live below this lower bound poverty line, far from the 0% target which was set for 2030. The second overarching goal that the National Development Plan aims to achieve is to reduce inequality in South Africa by dropping the Gini coefficient from 0.69 to 0.6 by 2030. The Gini coefficient is basically a measure of inequality in a country. And as of 2025, according to the World Bank, South Africa's Gini coefficient is estimated to be at 0.63. And South Africa continues to be one of the most and sometimes counted as the most unequal country in the world. As it stands, it is highly unlikely that we will achieve the 0.6 Gini coefficient target by 2030. Again, scoreboard is not looking good, my friends. I hate to say it, but our beloved republic at this point is kind of losing, man. Lots of potential, beauty, talent, skill, fire. But we're not winning, and that's something we need to address with time. We're not winning, and that's something we need to address with time. The overview section further highlights 6 priorities of the National Development Plan and 6 critical success factors for the implementation of the NDP. Among the key priorities are uniting South Africans around a common cause, speeding up economic growth, capacitating the people of the country and the state with the skills and infrastructure required for us to win and prosper, and cultivating visionary leadership that can steer the ship and inspire. The overview section concludes with a summary of the objectives and actions included in the National Development Plan. These objectives and actions are basically the meat of the National Development Plan and are detailed in chapters 3 to 15 of this National Development Plan. Chapter 1 is titled Policy Making in a Complex Environment. This chapter analyzes the major global and regional trends that shape South Africa's development landscape and describes how the country should position itself relative to these various trends. The chapter details 4 key trends. Firstly, globalization. Secondly, the rebalancing of global political and economic power. Third, climate change. And fourth and last, technological advancement. The first trend, globalization, refers to the increase in trade and the movement of people, capital, ideas, and technology across borders. Globalization provides opportunities for South Africa because it provides us with access to global markets, technology, and capital, which we can take advantage of. However, this increased interconnectedness means that we are more subject to global crises, as more of our economy and activities are linked with countries from across the globe. The second trend is the rebalancing of political and economic power globally. In 2012, there's a recognition of the relative decline in the political and economic weight that historically dominant nations like the US, Japan, and those in Europe have relative to rapidly growing economies like China, India, and Brazil. The National Development Plan highlights that this shifting of global centers of influence could lead to the reorganization of the international diplomatic and governance architecture. Today, this is clearer than it's ever been. For South Africa, the rebalancing of power means a greater demand for our commodities by emerging economies. Lots of trade potential presented by this. However, globalization and the rebalancing of power also means that these emerging economies will become dominant and possibly outcompete us in certain domestically important sectors like manufacturing. This means that South Africa will need to be more nimble in identifying and taking advantage of areas of competitive advantage if we are to win in an increasingly globalized marketplace. Regional cooperation with other African countries is also highlighted as being key to creating mutually beneficial and synergistic trading relationships that will develop the region and Africa as a whole. As Africa progresses and develops, South Africa is well positioned to proactively aid in this development and benefit from this development. The third trend, which is highlighted in this chapter, is climate change. With African countries being disproportionately affected by climate change related shocks, the NDP prioritizes the importance of South Africa facilitating a just transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy. The final trend is technological advancement. The usual characteristic rapid evolution of technology and its potential to advance and better distribute quality education, healthcare, and so on is acknowledged. On the flip side, the potential of technology change to enhance the digital divide that exists between the haves and the have-nots and further exacerbate inequality is also highlighted. From this chapter, we see that there's an enormous amount of opportunity provided by globalization and the evolution of technology globally. However, our increased interconnectedness and the complexity of these emerging technologies also presents unprecedented risks that we should proactively confront and navigate if we are to stand any chance of winning in the modern world. And as it stands, good people, scoreboard is not looking good for South Africa. So going forward, we all have a responsibility to better understand, map out, and proactively navigate these globally relevant trends. Chapter 3 is titled Demographic Trends. This chapter details the nation's current and future population trends to inform the state's decisions and resource allocation going forward. A key demographic trend with significant implications, which I would like to zoom into, is the large labor force in the country identified in 2012. In 2012, South Africa's labor force, comprising of people aged between 15 and 64, made up 64% of the nation's population. In this case, the labor force makes up a significantly larger proportion of the population than dependent people who are very young, below 15 years old, or very old, above 64 years old. The presence of such a large labor force can result in one of two scenarios. On the positive side, if the majority of the labor force is gainfully employed, the nation will have an increased economic output, resulting in an economic boom. This scenario is referred to as a demographic dividend, as the population provides more economic value than it takes from the state. This has been observed in middle-income countries in Asia and Latin America in the past. On the other hand, the other scenario, if the majority of this large labor force is not gainfully employed, there's an increased economic dependence on the state, and the large unemployed and frustrated labor force becomes a threat to social, political, and economic stability. While the National Development Plan was optimistic that we can achieve this demographic dividend, the high rate of unemployment, inequality, and crime suggests that we are closer to a demographic liability scenario than the demographic dividend scenario in our case. As the labor force ages, the proportion of the labor force versus the very young and old decreases, and the window within which a demographic dividend can be realized slowly passes. Currently, our population structure still provides the opportunity for South Africa to realize a demographic dividend. For this to be possible, the labor force needs to be gainfully employed, which is something that the nation is failing at dismally at this point. Sad to say. We'll unpack some of the employment-related challenges in the next episode when we delve into Chapter 3 of the NDP. Other demographic trends touched on in Chapter 2 include the steadily decreasing fertility rate, increasing life expectancy, high mortality rate, and increased migration from rural to urban areas, as well as increased cross-border migration into South Africa. Today, we have covered the first 108 pages of the National Development Plan, understanding its origins and purpose and the context that it aimed to respond to when crafting the nation's vision and goals for 2030. On the next episode, we'll detail and report on the progress toward achieving the targets laid out in Chapter 3 of the National Development Plan, which is titled Economy and Unemployment. Until then, thank you for your time and attention. And please, let's help our country win. Because losing is far from a state of affairs that we should just be, content and okay with. Until next time, sharp, sharp.